All right. Good evening, everybody. Good Sunday evening and happy New Year to all the Talking TSR fans out there. My name is Chris Doyle, and to my virtual left, we have Rick Maffei. How's you doing, sir?
I am doing good. How are you doing, my friend, this early in the new year?
Doing very, very well. Getting lots of good news in my personal life. My football team won earlier today, so I'm excited. They live for another week,
That's
so
good.
so that's a good thing. So I might conflict in some of my gaming plans next weekend, but I'll worry about that. Those are good problems to have these days.
That
To
is.
actually have social problems that are
Yeah.
good. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. And also got some great news that my son was accepted into Rutgers University
Oh,
this past
nice.
weekend, and he's already excited. That's where he wants to go. So he'll be the third generation in our family going to
Wow.
Rutgers. So.
And having known you for a while, I still can't process that your son is that old to be in college. I'm going to have to, mull over that a bit.
Yeah, yeah, they grow up quick. They grow up
They
quick. He runs
do.
his own games now. So.
That's one of those, old sayings that once I became a parent, I realized just how dreadfully true that is, that they grow up before you know it. It's so true.
It is so so so
Cliche,
so
but
true.
so true.
So how is your new year going?
Good. Rung it in fairly quietly, but yeah, I'm kind of making a job switch and a bunch of other changes. Good changes, I'm happy to say, on
Good.
the horizon. So yeah, me too.
Sweet.
Got a lot of things going on. It looks like it's going to be a busy 2021.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and
So, but
I think it'll be a better year than last year, which I guess isn't a hard stretch, but I'm
no.
looking forward to seeing what 2021 brings. So yeah, I'm
Yeah,
stoked.
indeed, indeed. Well, we have a very special show for you guys tonight. We're kicking off the year with a bang. We have an extremely special guest, which I'd like to introduce now. We have Professor Dungeonmaster, host of his own YouTube show, Dungeon Craft. We are very pleased to have him. So we're going to have Thornett and there he is. He's popped up in the middle screen and everything. So welcome, 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 welcome.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Rick.
So appreciate it. So this is ironic. So I got to tell you the story of how I even know Professor Dungeonmaster. My son plays in a couple of local games before the pandemic. He was playing in a couple of games, and one of the games he was playing at was a local church. And lo and behold, his game master ends up being Professor Dungeonmaster. And I just dropped him off one night and found out about it, the history, and it was great. I was like, wow, this is awesome. Ran home, checked out a bunch of his videos, and I was like, wow, this is great. So when we started this show back in April, I was in the back of my head, I was like, you know what, it'd be great to have Dan on at some point. And here he is, and he's joining us today. And I'm very pleased and I'm excited, and we have a lot of good questions for him. But not only that, this is a great one for you viewers out there. Use the chat if you guys have any specific questions for Professor Dungeon Master. Put them in the chat. We will grab them, and we will run with them, and we'll have a nice little back and forth here. So again, welcome, Professor Dungeon Master.
Yeah.
Great to be here.
All right, let's kick it off. So give us a little a thumbnail, if you will, on what is your YouTube show, Dungeon Craft.
So on Dungeon Craft, I show you how to play a better game of Dungeons and Dragons, how to design encounters. I give you my opinions on how rules changes you can make. And I also do crafting things. So I'm most well known for Ultimate Dungeon Terrain, which looks like a circle of styrofoam. And instead of building out an entire room of, a table of rooms, you could just put the Ultimate Dungeon Terrain, the circle in the center of the table. You could play the game that way. So it's called Dungeon Craft because it's both about running the game and also crafting for the game.
Mhm.
Excellent, excellent. Why what struck your fancy one day to say, I'm gonna do a YouTube channel and I'm gonna put myself out there and I'm gonna, create all sorts of content and be a slave to the algorithm if that's what you are. What was that watershed moment that pulled you in?
So I have a friend, a colleague, and I had bought her son the basic starter set. And they always had questions about D&D, which I would answer for her. And she said, you know a lot about Dungeons and Dragons. You should have a YouTube channel. And I said, I don't know anything about YouTube. I know nothing about it. And I don't have a camera or anything like that. And she said, it's easy. You just use your iPhone. So I said, okay. I looked around at the different channels and I started shooting some footage on my iPhone. And quickly, the iPhone got filled with video. So I go to the Apple store and I say, listen, my iPhone is filled. And they said, well, if you want a YouTube channel, you got to get a camera. So then I got a camera. And then the camera, I started uploading to iMovie, and then it ran out of space. So I went back to the Apple store and they said, if you want a YouTube channel, you have to get an external hard drive. And then I ended up with a second camera because I broke one and I didn't get the extended warranty, because who gets that until you break it? And then my hard drive crashed and I had to pay people to recover the information. I ended up with another computer just for Dungeon Craft, and by one thing just steamrolled into another thing, to the point where I was $5,000 or $6,000 into it. And I said, I at least got to get my money back. I got to put out a YouTube channel. And meanwhile, my friend Carrie has no idea what she's talking about. She doesn't know anything about videotaping or she doesn't have a YouTube channel. So she just told me it was easy and I believed it. But I love her, because if I hadn't listened to her, then I never would have had a YouTube channel at all.
That's great. I love that. That is just, oh yeah. And now you're down the rabbit hole and it's off running. And just, so how many years ago was that about? When was that you?
About 3 or 4 years ago, even though the channel is not, maybe I think the channel's been on for 3 years, but I was making demo videos for myself like a year before that.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And because I don't know anything about technology, I didn't know about video editing. I've never taped anything with a video camera. I don't know anything about audio, nothing about YouTube.
So you just self-taught everything?
Yeah, because I found out, I assumed that maybe my children, they're tech savvy, they'd be able to teach me. No. And I asked around. The youngsters, they know how to play video games, but they don't really know how to edit film or do anything. So I had to do everything myself, everything, the thumbnails, all these different ancillary skills that now I have learned, but I had no one taught me. I had to do it all myself.
That's terrific.
That's great. Excellent.
And now you've got a popular channel. So, and you put out videos fairly frequently, once or twice a week, isn't that right?
That's correct. At least once a week.
Wow. Is that a lot? Do you find that a demand on your real life, kind of maintain that schedule?
Another question for Mrs. Professor Dungeonmaster.
There you go.
Not really, especially with the COVID. There's a lot more time. I don't have to commute. So
this is true. And now, in your real life, as you've mentioned on your channel, you are an actual professor, right?
Well, I currently teach and have taught English in a secondary school for 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I did work as an adjunct professor at Wagner College, New York City.
Oh, yeah.
Teaching a bridge program for high school students that want to go to college. And I also taught education methods as an adjunct for Wagner College. So I taught teachers how to teach.
Mm.
But the ironic thing is, once Dungeon Craft took off, I make more money doing that. So I have retired as an adjunct professor.
Wow.
Well, you've definitely got your bona fides. And I have to ask, have any of your students at any point, either when you were teaching or not, mention your actual channel and say, hey, I saw you on YouTube? Or
all the time. Many of my students, I used to run a group for D&D for my students.
Mm-hmm.
And now in the hallways, well, when we used to have hallways, but people I wouldn't know, hey, professor, how you doing? And then now on Zoom, students will say, if somebody always knows and puts it in the chat, yeah, this guy's got a YouTube channel. And then someone will start while I'm teaching, they will go to YouTube and then come back with, oh, this guy just has 50,000 on his latest video. He's legit.
He's legit. There you go.
I've learned this from my son that, while the students now are, remote learning, they're carrying on little side conversations. But I can tell you, having a good number of YouTube subscribers ups your cool quotient very, very high with these students. And one thing we kind of all realized not too long before we got on the air is, aside from being geographically not terribly far away from each other, the three of us, we are in a little sort of club in that we've all been published at one time or another in Dungeon magazine. So tell us about your experience with that.
My first publication in Dungeon was with a friend of mine, Raphael, and he had run this is in the second edition days, early second edition, and he had run, we weren't playing second edition, we were playing Warhammer, because with second edition, sort of the demons went out, and Warhammer was just like, you don't like demons, we will double down on it. And we were playing that game, and he ran a session that I thought was really good, where it was set in a manor. It was like a sort of a locked room murder mystery in this manor, and there was cultists running around. I thought it was really great. It would make a great dungeon submission. So I proposed it. We proposed it to Barbara Young. We sent in the proposal, and then we went to Gen Con, and we went to a seminar where Barbara Young, who's the editor, talked about what she was looking for. And after we kind of, went up to her and we said, have you read our proposal yet? And she eventually accepted it. And in retrospect, it wasn't very good. It ended up it was originally titled The Secret of Faustman Manor. And it ended up called, Is There an Elf in the House? And the reason why it has to do with a ritual. And it originally, they were trying to summon a demon, but you couldn't have demons. So it ended up, this evil magic user, the sorceress, wants to sacrifice an elf so she can raise up her ex-husband from the dead.
Oh, wow.
And we had to write around it. And then that was my first publication for that.
Nice. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that seminar at Gen Con. I was probably in the room with you, believe it or not, because back then, my first publication in Dungeon was issue 63, 64, right somewhere in that area.
Yeah.
So we were probably, and I went to many of those seminars before I was published, and then during the time when I was published. So it's ironic that there is a good chance that we were probably both in the same room, but in Milwaukee at that point. So that's great. I just a little aside. So we are getting some questions, specific ones already. First of all, our first question we have is for you, Professor Dungeonmaster, is this fan loves your campaign video updates. Any chance for more of those coming soon?
So that it's funny. I was just uploading some stuff today. The campaign updates, I would do a monthly campaign update, and it was based on my version of the Keep and the Borderlands, which of course, Chris, you're familiar with because you did Into the Borderlands, which I gave a good review in Dungeon Craft before I even knew you.
Yes, all true.
So it's a grimdark version called The Caves of Carnage, and so I would update it once a month. But then it wrapped up. And since then, I did a one on Ravenloft. I ran doing Ravenloft in one night, and that aired just last month. But what I've noticed is those videos are the worst performing on the channel. So I have since moved them over to Patreon, where I go, and they're far longer and more in depth. So they used to be about a 10-minute video once a month. So over on Patreon, I uploaded 4 videos today that'll air this week, and they go up to 40 minutes. So that kind of is moved to Patreon, where you have to pay, but you get way more videos if you like that sort of campaign kind of stuff.
Great. Well, thanks for that update. The other, not really a question, more of a comment that we got is somebody wants to know when you're going to run a game on Twitch. So this is my first experience with Twitch,
and I didn't even know what it was. I mean, I know people game on it, and I know they have the panels up there. But the funny thing, for my friends that know me running a YouTube channel, I'm a complete Luddite. I don't like technology. I don't know how to. When Kerry said, "Yeah, you ought to have a channel, use your iPhone," I had just bought an iPhone. I had a flip phone. I go to the bank to make deposits, like.
So do I.
So I don't Twitch. I don't Twitch. I am on Twitter, and I'm terrified. I just put out nice things like, here's a new episode of Dungeon Craft. And my son said, "Dad, your Twitter is so boring." I said, "What should be on there?" She said, and he said, "Well, that's where you put your thoughts." And I said, "No, no, that's what I'm never doing."
Oh, geez, that's great.
No Twitch anytime soon.
Okay, no Twitch. So people are bummed by that. Any other follow-ups on the Dungeon magazine, Rick, or are we good?
Yeah, no, I think we're good. I just think it's and I'm trying to think of yeah, because Professor Dungeonmaster, you had actually another adventure in Dungeon that was also like a sort of murder mystery, because I remember the monastery one well. So
I do
once
too.
I saw the cover. So do you find that you enjoy that kind of adventure, like the murder mystery kind of or more clue laden adventures?
I do, and that one was on hallowed ground. And the best thing about it was the cover art.
Oh, yeah.
That was a big thrill for me. It's not that great a scenario, but what it was is a decent murder mystery for Dungeons and Dragons. So the way I had written it and Faustman Manor was mostly as a timeline. I wanted it to be a timeline adventure. But the format of Dungeon was, nope, we have to have keyed locations. So you end up with this combination, which I don't think reads very well, but they paid better because it doubled the word count. And in retrospect, it could be a better mystery. It's it leads the players along, but I think that most players at the time did not play mystery scenarios. And that's kind of what you needed to do.
Yeah.
So the third one, I just want to mention Jigsaw, because I partnered with that one, which ended up, I get the cover, and Tony DiTerlizzi painted it. He's a fantastic, he's a fantastic author, great guy. But my partner on that was Christina Stiles, who wrote several modules for Goodman Games.
Yes. Yep, she wrote the Juggernaut, the two Juggernaut modules in the 20s, 22, 23, something like that, 21, 22, somewhere in there.
A while back.
Yeah, she's done a lot of things. Yeah, I've actually collaborated with her on a couple of things with Atlas Games. She's done a bunch of things. She's been around for quite some time. So it's a small world. It's a small world when you go down, especially this industry.
It really is. Yeah, I'll warn you that up front. The more you socialize with Chris, the more you'll find you crisscross with him. Because even now, when I went back and kind of looked at some of the Dungeon issues, I realized, Chris, that I think one of the issues you're published in is the one just before I was published in. Like we're all within a
right in that area. And Tony DiTerlizzi did the cover art for mine. And I tried. I've told Drick this story. I haven't told Professor Dungeonmaster this. I went to his apartment. He invited me to his apartment in Brooklyn before he became, a Hollywood star and everything. I wanted to buy the artwork, and he sold it already to somebody else, and he felt so bad. He let me look through his entire collection, and I could pick out any other piece of artwork I wanted to buy, and I picked out a bootleg Star Wars piece that he had done that was not endorsed by Lucasfilm, and it hangs up proudly in my basement to this day. So,
which I believe I have seen.
Yes, you have. Yes.
If it's one of the dancers from Jabba's palace, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, and her backside.
That's funny. I love that. Well, for what it's worth, I did not attend the Barbara Young seminar. When I did my adventure, they were crossing over kind of editorship, and it was, and I got kind of hit by that because I submitted an adventure. It was accepted at a certain word count. I wrote the whole thing. Barbara Young sent it back to me with happily very few red lines in it. And then I guess it was Chris Perkins stepped in to take over from Barbara Young, and they decided to change the word count requirements. And then he came back to me and he said, this adventure is wonderful, but instead of 18,000 words, we need you to cut it down to 14,000, even though there's nothing wrong with it. I said, what? So
that was a time of turbulence then. Actually,
yeah.
There was a couple more editors in between Barbara. There was
Oh yeah,
Wolfgang,
well,
there was Michelle,
yeah,
there was Dave, and
yeah.
then there was Chris. And then mine was actually accepted, and then TSR went belly up, and then it sat for 2.5 years, and it actually wasn't printed until Wizards got, it was still TSR, but Wizards was under control at that
I
point.
remember that. There was a lot. I remember Wolfgang, it seemed like Wolfgang kind of got thrown into the hot seat very quickly, was the feeling I got. And a lot of
I was crushed because even though I'd already had a couple publications with West End Games, I didn't feel like I'd earned those. I'd kind of fallen into those. I really felt like I earned the Dungeon Magazine ones. And then I was like, I got accepted. I was like, oh, I finally hit the big time TSR. And then it took 2.5 years. And I was like, oh, and then I went back and did more stuff for West End Games.
Still good to have it in there though, good things come to those who wait. Now we've got another comment in the chat. Somebody's commenting that the professor's old school style is very DCC. He borrows from DCC spellcasting tables. Any other parts of DCC that the professor uses in your play?
The thing about DCC, it just, I think it's right behind me. Is it right behind me? I don't think I took anything from it. It just coincidentally, like those spellcasting table was my kind of vibe. And I remember when I got the book, I just love it, especially the art. In one of my episodes, I said that the cover art, like the inside cover art, ought to be on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Like, I just love the whole vibe of the game. And the biggest thing I take from Dungeon Crawl Classics, though, is the character funnel. Like, I think that's a lot of fun. The idea that you start your character at 0 level with D4 hit points, and you go in a dungeon, and everyone's got 3 characters, and you whittle them down to the last 2 or 3. Everyone, a party of 4 has 3 characters, and you whittle them down to the best of those 3. I think that's hilarious. That's a great way to design a character. That's primarily what I take, but I take inspiration from it. And it does have a real old school vibe. So it's I do like that game.
I think that's something we share, a love of that old school vibe.
Yeah, it definitely sings to all of us. So Professor Dungeonmaster, how did you get started in role-playing games? How and when? When was, when did that happen? Were you in college, high school?
So it was 20 years ago exactly. Okay. It'll be this upcoming Christmas, 2021, will be the 20th anniversary of me first laying eyes on the Tom Mulvey basic set, 1980, 81. And my friend Joey invited me over. He had gotten it for Christmas. It was the day after Christmas. It's December 26th. And he had gotten it, and he knew I wanted to play it because everyone was talking in the neighborhood about it. And this is before an internet.
Yeah.
Everyone was talking about it and who had played it and all the magical things that were happening with it and how cool it was, and older kids played it. So I go over to Joey's house and we rolled up characters. We drank hot chocolate on this cold, dark, snowy night and we made up characters. He didn't know how to do it because he rolled the 20 sided die for stats.
Yeah.
And then all we did was made up the characters. And we were under the impression that a dungeon master was an expert in the game. And knew everything and was some sort of player that had leveled up to unbelievable levels. And so we couldn't find one. And then he lent me the book and he says, I'm not really going to read this. You read it and just give me a summary. So I read it in 2 days and I came back to him and I said, this is the most amazing game ever. Like, we have to play it now. We have to get together people to play it. But the problem was, I was in my friend group kind of the youngest runty kid. Joe's 2 years older. My other friends were 3 years older. I was that tag along kid that they had me, hang around, but they didn't, I had no leadership. And so I was saying, we got to play this game. And they always said, let's save it for a rainy day. That's what you do on a rainy day. But a rainy day never came. So I had to round up the younger kids in the neighborhood to play the game. And because I was the only one that read it, I had to become the dungeon master. And that was how I first got into the game. And I never saw it demonstrated. I had to read it.
Yeah.
Because there was nowhere to see it played. I had no wargaming background. I was that first generation, no wargaming background. Just read that book. And I was under the misimpression that the one thing I couldn't understand is why in the sample example of play, why they couldn't see the map. Because with the Keep on the Borderlands, I thought you put the map out for them. I didn't understand that part was hidden. So that was my misunderstanding based on they never actually said that. Only the Dungeon Master sees the map. They never, but that's how I learned to play.
Yeah, that is it's a similar story.
Yeah.
I learned back in 82, 83, I forget. And actually maybe it was 81. I can't remember exactly which year it was, but again, a kid moved into our town and he had played with somebody and he brought the game with him. And there was basically within 2 weeks, there was 20 of us playing in grammar school. And then, 2 months after that, there was 2 of us playing. And then I never stopped. So basically, but that was the thing. You didn't know that you had to read the rules and you just, I remember so many times 6 months later finding out how saving throws worked.
Yeah.
Like, oh wow, that's how saving throws work. Just there was those moments like that. Like, it's like, oh, that's how you're supposed to do that. And you learned from another game master or somebody else running the game. And then of course, everybody ran their game differently. Yeah. So there was times you were running the wrong rule or just doing something because that's the way you were taught. And reading thick books when you're in 5th grade that's hard. So
well, again, I think it's a product of the time. I think the fact that we all sort of within a certain time frame started playing, it's pre-internet, there were no forums, there were no videos to look up like today and find out how to play. And I had a very similar and the same exact thing with the map in that I was using the box set with the In Search of the Unknown module in it, and we just I called over a friend and I said, I've just picked up the most cool game. We've got to play this immediately. We didn't know what we were doing. And we looked at the map and just started going from room to room, looking at the map as we played, basically, because we didn't, same thing. We didn't know about any kind of, the players aren't supposed to see the map. And we didn't even really have a DM our kind of first session. We kind of self-DM'd it. If and it was just, and yet it's still, I look back on it very fondly as a sort of good memory. I think, it's good though. I think for folks like us who did how to kind of forge our way through it. I'm seeing a bunch of questions come popping in here.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of questions.
Holy smoke, we're getting a lot of questions.
You want me to grab? I'll grab.
Go ahead. Why don't you throw one out, Chris?
And I almost wonder if this one's for Professor Dungeonmaster, if this one's for us. Can we have more tutorials on designing new monsters, stats, and mini-wise? So I think this is for Professor Dungeonmaster. Yeah. So throw that out there for you.
I'm going to be doing that shortly. Dungeon Craft runs about 10 episodes ahead, so there's 10 episodes in the can. Gotcha. But in 2021, and someone mentioned the campaign updates earlier, I will be talking about designing whole encounters. And it's about in 10 minutes, I'll give you a whole encounter. And I may either show you a module and that how I would run it, or I will just build an encounter. Here's a final encounter for you to use. And I will be talking about that kind of thing, stats and stuff like that.
That's great. Now, obviously you have many videos full of advice for dungeon masters. But if you had to throw one piece of advice out there for new or existing DMs, what would it be in a nutshell?
The most important piece of advice, there's really 2 of them that have to do with the same thing. It's the 20-sided die. If you understand that the game it only works in 5% increments on that 20-sided die.
Mhm.
The entire game comes down to the Dungeon Master establishes a target number. All the rules do is give you help with that,
Mhm.
but you pick the target number, and the players have to roll that. And they have all their character sheet can be boiled down to is just a bunch of pluses. And by the way, this is in an upcoming video. If you're 9th level, the plus is +9. And it doesn't matter what you are. When you add your proficiency bonus and you maxed out your prime requisite ability score, you essentially gain 1 point per level. So you could play the game really without looking at a character sheet. Just give yourself +1 per level, and the Dungeon Master this is the score that you have to roll. This is the target number. That's it. That's all you really need to play the game. And my other piece of advice with how the 20-sided die should be treated, I believe you have a game that's way more tense if you roll it out in front of everybody.
Mhm.
I never hide the 20-sided. Like if I roll 20s natural, and I did this in a game last night, shook up the dice, and I did it in a game, Chris, with your son. Two 20-sided dice, natural 20s,
Oh,
extra damage dies. And when the players know that, then they become terrified.
Mhm.
That adds the suspense.
Mhm.
So that's knowing your 20-sided die and how it works.
Mhm.
Excellent. Yeah, that is great. So we're gonna get into this. Actually, we kind of had this question for later on, but it came through the chat, so we're gonna ask it now. Your thoughts on the 2nd edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and maybe even if you want to put that into a little bit of a perspective of some of the other editions of Dungeons and Dragons, kind of in a bigger picture there.
I got a comment, a rather uncharitable comment on a recent video that says, call me old and said I should go back to the 2nd edition. Here's the irony, because I dared criticize the 5th edition that it was a little too soft. So here's what I think of the 2nd edition. It was too soft too. And I thought it was and I wrote for it, very milquetoast. I did not like the way they eliminated the word thief and replaced it with rogue. It was entirely done to make the game family friendly. Well, we don't want it associated with thievery.
Yeah.
And the elimination of all demons and devils, it really sapped all the personality out of that game. It's a better written edition with smoother rules, better initiative rules, for example. But in my opinion, it's just devoid of, and I could put my finger on it, the sense of danger and sort of menace that 1st edition had, an adult kind of like an adult theme. So I think that the reason that the primary reason that 2nd edition was written was thieves, devils, get them out of there, and eliminate that picture of the succubus the topless succubus on page 230. And then on page 192, across from A Miracle, the Chaotic, there was a chart of harlots.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember that.
We've mentioned on the show dungeon module A3, the House of Ill Repute. Those things were in there now, because that was the foundation of the creation of the game. Those old pulpy appendix N stories were very, very much in that. And I myself am not a huge appendix N fan. I've read some Conan, but that's the style. That was the appeal back then. I mean, and that's what brought people in back in the 60s and the 70s and the early 80s. We take some of these things for granted today. I mean, I agree with you 100%. 5th edition is way too kind. Or maybe put it a different way, from a game master's perspective, it's hard to kill player characters in 5th edition. It's very hard to kill them, and that does tend to remove a sense of danger and urgency. I get what the designers are trying to do. If your character dies at the game table, you don't have anything to do. You don't want to travel a half hour when people used to get together in person, and this is your one time of a week when you're going to role play and you're all excited, and 15 minutes in your character dies and you don't have anything else to do at the game table. I get that, I understand that, but there needs to be a little bit of a balance there. And it's funny because when you read the 5th edition rule books, you tend to think it's like first edition
Mhm.
and it has all these and it's deadly that when you actually play it, you
Yeah.
get to understand that it really isn't. And
Yeah.
even and Rick and I had been designing 5e for a couple of years, and I didn't realize it until I started playing it more. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I see what they're doing here. It's like, once you're at the game table. It's a very interesting perspective.
Yeah, no, there's a very tangible difference in feel. And, again, from one perspective, I understand it because I think, the initial game was kind of started with war gamers and college students. And,
Yeah.
it did kind of distill down to younger children playing it. So I understand. And they certainly cleaned it up, I think, as far as indexing and all this kind of, kind of publishing presentation in 2nd edition. But absolutely, I agree. And even my own game, and I am not a killer DM, quote unquote, by any, I can't even remember the last time a player character died in one of, my run adventures. And yet I do run a difficult game. I do run a kind of game where occasionally the characters have to run away. And I have no problems with that. And, once in a while I've run into a player that kind of comes more from the superhero mentality, for lack of a better term, or they look at it as building a build as a build. They'll look at it as they craft a character the way you would craft a deck of Magic the Gathering cards, where they're going to put in a little of this and a little of that, and somehow that will make the Magic build that will work in every circumstance. And I just don't believe in that. I miss that grittiness. I recall in the original, I think DM's Dungeon Master's Guide, where Gygax gives an example of play, and there's an encounter with ghouls, and they basically says at a certain point the ghouls paralyze one of the characters, and then he says, well, just the DM assumes that the ghouls gobble him up.
Yeah.
And you'd never see that in an illustrated example of play, I don't think, today. That kind of thing where the DM just says, yeah, he's gone, kind of thing. Instead, there's up-teen saving throws, and even the poor beholder, and these creatures that have disintegration rays, I feel like they have to pass several layers of checks before they can disintegrate somebody. And yet there's some of the no save or die kind of stuff, I'm glad isn't in there anymore either. So I guess it's like you said, Chris, it's a balance. It's about, I think the game needs to swing a little bit back the other way.
Agreed. So we're going to go a little bit off track here because we are still getting some questions. So we're just going to go with these because this is great. We don't normally
Yeah, this is great.
Live questions. So Professor Dungeonmaster, how do you handle encumbrance in your game?
You get 12 sheets on a character sheet. You get 12 slots, and when they're filled, you're overly encumbered. That's it.
I like that.
That's simple. It works.
I like that. That's I really, really like that. Oh,
yeah.
Wow. Okay. That was cool. Okay. Let's see. Any favorite treasure or magic items that you like to dole out to characters?
I never give magic items to players. If magic items show up in my world, like if my players found a magic sword, they would throw it in the nearest lake. They'd be terrified of it because every magic item is evil. They're all just evil. So
that's cool.
So in the game that I ran yesterday, there is a magic item, the Liber Demonicum, and it is a demon trapped in a book, and it looks like human skin that's all stitched up, and it has a face and it talks like Jack Nicholson. And if you open it, its pages will look blank, but as you look closely, its pages will fill up with whatever your darkest desire is. And if you read the spell, it comes true. And if it's like a monkey's paw, it never works the way you think it's going to be, So my players are terrified of it. And anytime they get a magic item, they will turn it in to the nearest magic users guild so it can be locked away. They're afraid of them.
Wow, that's cool.
That is cool.
Right. Rick, you want to jump in on some terrain questions here?
Yes, I was just going to say, taking a little different direction, because especially with the advent of the pandemic, I've thrown myself into painting, and I've definitely embraced that. I've always painted figures, but I've gotten back into it in a big way and found it very cathartic, painting figures. And I'm certainly become aware of, people kind of making their own terrain. And I absolutely have noticed your videos where in a good number of videos, you are creating some really fantastic homemade, steps and terrain. And, tell me about that, how you got into that, and any, tricks or techniques you would offer to people to kind of get into that.
This is terrible. I'm gonna have to step off camera. Hold on.
Oh, sure.
I sense a prop coming.
Yeah, I do too.
So I should have
Show us.
had this ready to go. So this
There
is my
you go.
ultimate dungeon terrain,
Mhm.
right? And you can see we have these 3 rings, right?
Mhm.
And very simple idea. You take this is laminate floor tile, so it's double-sided, and you can take you get foam core, like from the dollar store, and you can carve the stone pattern. And with the 3 rings, that is where the melee combat is. This is where the ranged combat is. And this is far range, like far, near, point blank range. That's really all you need. And what you do is you put the monster in the middle, put the players around it, wherever they want to be, and then put your little terrain, whatever you have that could be blocking them, a pillar,
Mhm.
an archway, a door, just the most important terrain features. Because then you don't have to build out an entire dungeon. Because like I love Master Maze, or now it's Dwarven Forge. They just call it Dwarven Forge. And I have all the pieces. They're like, like I have all of them, and they're terrific. They're really great and detailed, and they're also very expensive. And what I found was it took an enormous amount of time to set everything up. And then you might only have a very brief encounter in this room. And so you could just replace all that with this.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, the best and first thing like everybody should make. That way it's just a different way of thinking about it. It's like a spotlight.
Yeah.
It's a spotlight. And I'm not the one that thought of that. It's Hanker Infernale at Runehammer. He thought of that. He's decided that's what we're calling it. You put the spotlight on the players wherever they are, and they're there. And to me, it's like the best of both worlds, because the great thing about Mind's Eye can be anything instantly. You don't have to set anything up and be wed to what is on the table. But the drawback is you don't know the positions and the distances. And this way you can have both of those things. And this doesn't clutter up your table space, and you put it on a Lazy Susan, and everyone can get their hands on it and move their figure. So it's just a quicker way to do that. And so like most of my stuff is based on that.
That's brilliant. And for what it's worth, yeah, I've got my eye on at least 2 different projects in your videos that I will be doing. So at some point, I promise you to send you a picture, either for you to laugh at or something in private. I will send you a picture of the final result. But I think it's great because there's certainly, like you said, and I'm not taking away from Dwarven Forge, because I think I drool every time I see those pictures. And Chris and I discussed those last show, but there's certainly, with some work, you can make some terrific things. And you've given some really good examples in your video, your different videos of, projects. So I, for one, am going to be delving into a couple of them because I've got the pandemic time now too. So.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions. We're going to jump right back into questions here.
Uh-huh.
Professor Dungeonmaster, how are you running your games during the pandemic? Are you using Zoom or using Roll20? What do you use?
So for my youth group, my college group, I do it via Zoom. And then with my group of adults, I have played in person, but they've all quarantined, and one already has the vaccine already. All right. So 2 out of 3 groups I do not physically play with, but I do it with Zoom, not Roll20. I looked into Fantasy Grounds and Roll20, but one of the things I noticed about them is it seems to be built for like a tactical game. It seems to be built like kind of like that you're going to see where the goblin archer is. But in my opinion, when you're playing a game over an electronic medium, it slows the game too much. That's just what I think. So it's it's forced me to go back into the mind's eye way of game mastering and just describe it. I think it's more for me to see people's eyes and see people's faces is more important than the models.
Yeah.
But in a physical game, the models are really cool because the player's like, yeah, that's really cool. It gets them into it. But in electronic form, I don't think for me, it's not as important. And I think that Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds and stuff like that, it seems to me like you're using, the video you've got all these maps and you're putting the goblins there and you're rolling out the combat. But it seems to me if you're going to go full video game, you may as well have the game like Diablo, where they just work out the math for you and it's faster. To me, it seems slower.
Yeah.
When it's like that. But that's me. I don't know.
No, I think that's a really interesting comment because I've just started delving into it. With my group, we are playing on Zoom, and I've been sort of roughing a lot of maps on Zoom. And I'm also playing with a different group using Roll20. And very recently, I actually had one of my players, basically, who were playing video, ask me if I could not put up the map quite so much and actually talk to them and look at them. Because I found, I think 75% of the time I kept throwing the map back on the screen so many times, especially during combat, that they never saw my face and there wasn't that sort of personal connection and that, the emotion coming from DM to player and, that sort of role-playing element seemed to be lost a little bit. And I was surprised when that comment came my way. And then I kind of thought about it. I thought, yeah, I kind of missed that too. So, I think I'm experiencing something very similar. I think, you have to be careful or it does become very video gamey. You get, and I like video, I like tactical and I like using miniatures at the real table, but I think you can go too far when you're using things, electronically, you lose that human connection. And I think, ultimately that's one of the best things around this game is getting people around the table, and I, for one, miss it.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, next question. Do you have a favorite or a most beloved piece of RPG memorabilia or something that you covet that you picked up or an autograph or something?
I do have a lot of autographs. I mean, I have my issue of Dungeon Magazine autographed by Gary Gygax.
Nice. That's great.
I think so that's up there. I think my favorite, most beloved piece of role-playing game memorabilia is that Tom Moldvay basic set rule book.
There you go.
1980 to 1981. Whenever I flip through it, I get happy.
Yeah, that's cool that is so special. It's not like it's from somebody's collection or autograph. It's just that's the beginning of it all. So
yeah,
I wish my box doesn't exist anymore. I played mine so much that box fell apart. So I have the rule books. I still have the rule books and original characters and whatnot, but the box is long gone, sadly. Okay, next question that we have here. What about the update about the system no initiative? I hope that means something to you.
That's a big one. I proposed in one of my videos that was very popular. You just do away with initiative because I find combat can be really slow. So initiative did not exist in the original Dungeons and Dragons. So for a while I was running games where, okay, if you're going to run up and hit the ogre, he's going to swing at you too. We're going to roll at the same time and let's see what happens. And if you hit it, and it misses you, we can just assume that it lost the initiative. Sort of, you could compress that. And it becomes a game that is, well, if you move close enough to the ogre, if you move close enough to that ogre, it can hit you. Do you really want to be that close? But if you then you can't move close enough, and it becomes, where is everybody standing? And it really speeds up the game. Now, recently I've moved back, and a new initiative video coming out in a few weeks, probably within a month, where I go back to, I settled on, because it was so complex to explain to people, that I've come to the conclusion that group initiative, but rolled with a D6. might be the best system.
Mhm.
And the reason is group initiative, everybody gets excited when that one person is rolling for initiative. Everyone stops. You stop thinking of yourself as an individual and you start thinking of yourself as a team.
Hmm.
And the D6 is brilliant because it doesn't have that much of a range. So you could conceivably get a tie. And the idea that maybe you will go last in one round and then win the initiative and go first and get to go back to back. That kind of unpredictability is exciting. So I've moved back to initiative, but not individual initiative, which I think is way too slow. It's so slow.
Yeah.
And
All right.
if you're gonna use that, you're better off. Why not just put everybody in dexterity order and just go in that way?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've heard, yeah, I've had some experience in doing that. So and that does speed things up. And you know, when you're the game master running a game, you just have so many things going on,
Right.
that just, you know, being able to go left to right, you know, right to left, whatever, it's just it sounds like it's kind of weird, but it's like it does make a big difference, and it does make things go a lot quicker. This is great. We never get these questions. This is amazing. We're just going off script here, and we're just going with the questions, which is great. What is your favorite character class and why?
I've never really thought about that.
Oh.
When I'm a rogue, when I play, I would play a rogue. I would a thief. That was my favorite character. But in the old days, because this is what was fun about him. You got to do a million things, but you only had like 2 hit points. So that was part of the excitement, that you were so fragile. You're a 3rd level thief. You got 9 hit points, and you could fail You mentioned, Rick, the example of play from the old AD&D Dungeon Master's guide. In the basic set, there was Black Dougal, who fails a single saving throw, he's dead.
Yep, that's it.
So I had all these thieves. They were all halfling thieves. Bingo Bobbins, Ringo Robbins, Dingo Dobbins, and they were all dead, you know, and that was my most fun, because I felt it was a lot of interesting things to do, but I felt it was a challenge to just survive.
Oh yeah. But you had all those percentages, you know. So
well, and imagine me,
percentage to do this, a percentage to do that.
Imagine me for the first year, I didn't know about saving throws. I died even more. I didn't know there was a chance you could not die. I was like, wait, when you get poisoned, don't you just die?
And see, that's that's the magic, though. Like I said, the fact that we kind of roughed through it. Like I didn't mention my first true experience with a real DM, and it was my second experience playing as a player, was the two Maharas. So talk about being thrown, from the pan into the fire, and yet I had a blast. So it's so funny, but you're right. Just so many characters were fragile back then. If you played a thief, or you played a magic user, you didn't have, as a magic user, you kind of had you had your one spell and not a whole lot of hit points. A very different experience from all the at-wills and such now, right?
All right, we got to get this question in. And the follow-up questions. We definitely got to dump
Talking
on this.
TSR question.
Yes. So what is your favorite TSR adventure, and why?
My favorite, if I'm forced, it is the Keep on the Borderlands, because it's the blueprint. It's the blueprint. It sets up the home base and the dungeon. And the more I've run it, the more I realize it seems like it's so simple, and yet it's so subtle. The reason those caves are that size, every cave is 5 or 6 rooms, because that's one evening, one session's worth of play. And it really was the blueprint that taught me how to run a game. And if I had to pick another one, it would be Ravenloft, because that's the one that took it to the next level. Where the monster, they weren't living in a monster condo, and Strahd came to you. And he had that great, the fortunes of Ravenloft, so it mixed up the different goals. And I think they are the 2 spectrums of role play. It's the dungeon crawl, but Ravenloft also made us think about, what if the vampire isn't entirely evil? Like, he's got that tragic backstory, so you kind of feel sympathy for him. And that's kind of that's the kind of postmodern. First of all, it's the more more role play heavy kind of thing. What's the story behind this dungeon? And all, it's also that this postmodern, like maybe the monster is not so monstrous, and maybe the orcs aren't all that bad, all of them all the time. I think that all started with Ravenloft. So those are the two modules that are the dividing line for me, landmark.
So Rick, what is your favorite?
Oh boy,
classic TSR.
As you know, I've got a whole bunch. Yeah, that's I mean, I have initial nostalgia for In Search of the Unknown, but as you know, I love Hidden Shrine of Timochin, even though it's very unusual. The background. I just think it's got a great combination of interesting monsters, creatures, traps, etc. Very immersive. Anything like that is very immersive. I enjoy. So, and yet, to all the comments about Ravenloft, I find myself like nodding because
well, when we did our top 10 a few months ago, Ravenloft was my number one.
Yeah,
because for those reasons that you mentioned, Professor.
Yeah.
The story, the tarot system, where theoretically you could replay it with the same group, and I've used that module 2 times with the same group, with basically different results. Nobody remembers the layout of the castle because there's so many rooms in it. So you can do it. They knew when they got into it, oh, we're doing this again, and it was almost like a completely different experience. And it was like, I don't think you could do that with too many modules. You could certainly rerun these modules with other new groups, certainly, but you're hard pressed to run them again. So that was definitely my first. So
and I mean, the observation too about the villain, I think is so on point, because I've even when we did the Goodman's how to write adventures that don't suck, I wrote a whole section on villain design, and I think that's one of the points I stressed, kind of frankly taken from, I think, good fiction and good film, in that not making the villains absolute black and white or cardboard villains, as I like to say, is just injecting some humanity in them, whether it's humor or their interest or their weakness or their their sad backstory or something. It just makes them better. I remember some actor, and I can't remember who it was, saying, the way they play a villain, and it was one of these actors that tends to come back and play villains again and again, is he says he just plays the villain in believing in their cause. He doesn't play them as evil. He just plays them as, absolutely believing in what they're doing. And those are the best villains, and I think Ravenloft brought that in a way that earlier modules did not. It brought that nice shade of gray a little bit to the villain, which was really good. Now, if you had to, Professor Dungeonmaster, if you had to then look beyond TSR, is there like a favorite non-TSR adventure that you've always, taken a shine to?
The Enemy Within campaign for Warhammer, and particularly The Power Behind the Throne, which was written by Carl Sargent, who wrote, I think, some D&D stuff as well.
Oh, yeah.
Right below.
But, Carl
Sargent.
Oh, yeah. The Power Behind the Throne is a massive role-playing module with only combat at the end. It's probably could be 9, 12 sessions with 2 combats, with a really complex web of intrigue and something like 20 NPCs that you would have to play. And I love that. I love that that module, Power Behind the Throne. I think it's great.
Awesome. So obviously you've mentioned Warhammer. Aside from Warhammer, do you have any other really favorite old school role-playing systems that you played with back in the day, that you had particularly enjoyable time with?
I don't know if it's really old school. I thought it was one of the most innovative games of all time, the James Bond 007 game by Victory Games.
By Victory Games. I
think that is a system that is original, that does not look like D&D, and that it perfectly captures the feeling of a James Bond film. Unfortunately, when I played it when I was 15 or 16, neither I nor my game master, and when I game mastered, none of my players had the wherewithal to be James Bond. And none of us were that cool or worldly, but that game is a brilliant game. It's a brilliant piece of game design, one of the best ever.
Yeah. That was the complaint, because I've actually played some Top Secret. I have a buddy who is a huge
Mhm.
modern gamer, and he is still looking to this day. He's still looking for the perfect
Yeah.
modern spy system.
Mhm.
And we've played the old Top Secret and the new Top Secret that came out a few years ago. And the old Top Secret, it felt like Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, I know,
Yeah.
and that was the problem. And it was like, it
Yeah.
just didn't, it doesn't work with gunfights and whatnot. It just doesn't. They tried their
Yeah.
best,
Yeah.
but it just didn't translate, and therefore it just didn't work. Unfortunately, so that is, wow, that is amazing that you mentioned that game. And
Mhm.
it's funny, I've not busted that. I'm gonna bust that out now
I
and
know.
look at that, and I'm
And I'm
like,
very familiar with that system too. And
yeah.
I love that system. And I'm literally getting this feeling of somebody else knows that game, So I think that's great.
Real quick comment in there. Someone said, "Is this going to be recorded?" Yeah, this will be put up on YouTube.
Yeah.
Give us like a week or two or something before
Yeah.
they
We'll
get
get
up
it up
there,
there.
so
Yeah.
you guys can see that. We still have some other questions here, but we are we're at the hour point here, so we have a couple more things I think that we want to get to. So we're gonna hold off on the questions that are coming through from the chat.
Yeah.
So we asked you on that. We talked about it a little bit before we jumped on camera, but one of the earlier questions that we did get in is, Professor Dungeonmaster, was there a particular game convention that you looked forward to, and that when the world gets back to normal, that you can't wait to get back to again?
Well, Gen Con was always a big thrill for me when I started going in the 80s. And then when I had my family, we started going back in the 2000s.
Mhm.
For my children, I have one son, my youngest son, that he grew up in that baby carry thing,
Mhm.
walking around Gen Con. And for
Wow.
him, now he's 16, that's his favorite place on earth.
Nice.
Like if his mother asks, "Hey, would you rather go to Disney World or Gen Con?" Even when my kids were like 8 or 9, they would say Gen Con.
Mhm.
And so I'd really like to get back there. I'm, fingers crossed. I'm not sure it's going to happen this year, but I think conventions are a lot of fun, and I hope they become a thing again.
Yeah.
Did you back in the early 90s, late 80s, there was quite the convention scene on the East Coast here,
Mhm.
especially this time of year, right after the beginning of year, from January until like April.
Mhm.
If you lived like in Connecticut or even like northern New Jersey, you were about almost every single weekend for 8 or 9 weekends, you were about a 2 to 3 to 4 hour drive from a small convention
Yeah.
that was, probably like 300-400 people. Maybe there was there's Total Confusion,
Yeah.
a whole bunch of them, down to Washington DC, couple in New Jersey, but most of them were up in Connecticut, Massachusetts, some in New York. Did you go to those back in the day, or were you just the big show kind of person?
No, never.
Wow.
I begged my parents, because in the early TSR stuff, they said they had Gen Con East in Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
Mhm.
It was, yeah.
And I begged my parents, "Can you take me to Cherry Hill?" And, they were like, "No, we're not taking you there." And now I realize it was only like an hour from where I lived. They weren't taking me to a convention. The first one I went to was Gen Con,
Yeah.
and I took a plane there. I must have been 20 years old or something. I took a
Wow.
plane,
Do you
and
remember which year that was?
about 1990.
Okay, yeah. My first was 87. And again, yeah, I was a
Yeah.
sophomore going in to be a junior in high school. And first, not the first time I was on a plane, but probably like the fourth or fifth time I was on a plane. Buddy of ours, mom chaperoned the trip, and a bunch of us got together and we just went to Jenga. Had no idea what we were getting into. None whatsoever.
Uh,
So,
well, back then the travel seemed, when you were younger, the travel seemed a little bit more formidable. But
yeah.
as we discussed in a previous kind of Gen Con theme show, I did get out to Gen Con East. So my brother drug me down to, Cherry Hill. He was good enough. He didn't even know where he was taking me, except I wanted to go. And he was a very good brother about it. So I did attend Gen Con East. But yeah, I wish there was still a Gen Con East. But yeah, that's great. But I love, the fact that you're sharing this, with family now. Like when I see parents with children at Gen Con, I love seeing that circle expand. And, parents kind of sharing it with their kids. I think it's the best thing because as we know, kind of from the older Gen Cons, it was all men. I used to call it the sea of jeans because it was, you just see all these, it was almost strictly men, and you just see all these guys in jeans and t-shirts, and that was it. All these older war gamers, and now I see, a total different demographic, and you see, you could very clearly see parents kind of introducing their kids to Gen Con, and it's fantastic. And once it's feasible, I will be dragging my kid out there. So
on that note, I have to tell you, Professor Dungeonmaster. So with the pandemic hitting, we do a lot of walks now. So, and a lot of times I will walk with Alec. And I'll always, I'll either, this will be Saturday, the day right after one of your sessions, and I always find out about, what happened in the session and everything. And he's always just excited. Sometimes even right when you guys finish up, he's like, let's go for a walk. It's 9:30, let's go on a Friday night. So we'll go for a walk and he'll give me the whole rundown. So ironically, earlier this year, you ran them through the ruined moat house, part of Village of Hamlet.
Yeah.
And about a week before you ran him through that, I didn't know you were running him through that. Alec came to me and said, I need a bandit lair that's partially ruined, and so I need a map. He's like, I'm not good at drawing maps. I got an idea for a module. He said, this is what I need. And I'm like, oh, and I'm like, I was literally working on the conversion at this time. I'm like, I got the maps for you exactly. I print out the 2 maps for him, okay, give them to him, and he uses them, and he's looking at them, and then he starts playing, and then we're on our walk, and he starts telling me, oh, we encountered a giant lizard in a room. I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. What was the next encounter? Oh, we were in this like kitchen or something, and a giant tick fell on us. And I was at that point, I was like, what? And I start figuring this all out, and I was like, and the maps for the 3 weeks when you were running those guys through that, the maps to the dungeon were sitting right next to his computer, and he had no idea, and I didn't tell him. And then afterwards, when I kept asking him, like, when you finishing up? And he finally said, we finished up. And then I said, okay, I need to know. And then I said, now I have to tell you something. And then I told him, you had the maps to the dungeon literally sitting 3 feet from you the whole time.
And meanwhile, Chris is thinking frogs, spider, giant lizard, rats.
Yep. So I had to share that story with you because that was just amazing. And I thank you for obviously being my son's game master. I think you've actually game mastered him probably more than I have for him. So he's probably learned more from you and your skill than he has actually learned from his old man. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
So we're pretty much at the end of the show here. So
yeah,
Rick, you want to do a little bit of a wrap up? First of all, before we go to the wrap up, Professor Dungeonmaster,
obviously,
yeah, you want to ask us or anything? So we've kind of hogged all your time here.
So a question: if one module that no one would suspect, the module that a module that didn't get enough attention, you think that's really good, one of the old TSR ones?
It didn't get it. I would say N1 against the cult of reptile god. Did I get you?
You got mine.
Rick and I were think alike.
Fine.
Yeah. I think that
Classic.
was, and again, there's issues in all of these modules. All right.
Yeah.
It was a little bit linear. It was a little bit you rely on the mage a little bit too much. But that one, I thought it had a nice little village, it had a nice little setup, it had a nice nearby dungeon, there was swamps, there was drugs, it had everything. I think that's the one that I always go to that kind of flies underneath the radar, because I think most of the other ones that I really like are above. I didn't say my obvious one,
yeah,
which I get a lot of flack on. So Rick, give you a 1A.
What's that?
Okay, what would your, not counting N1, what would
because I N1 would be because I really feel like it does not get the attention it deserves. And
Doug Niles, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think who I think is a great writer. And
yes.
I even think the kind of base of operations, the village environment, and it absolutely stands up to Hamlet or most of the other environments presented, in different modules. But yeah, following that, I would just go back to what I said earlier, and I will haunt people with it, I'm sure, in a future show, is the Hidden Shrine of Timoichin, just because just for sheer creativity of the traps and just oozing atmosphere and theme. Again, not a standard environment because it's sort of like an Aztec pyramid kind of, theme. But I always love that one. I've always run people through that and found it, very enjoyable. And I don't see that pop up on people's lists very often in favorite adventures. And I've got plenty of TSR classics that show up on the list, but that one never seems to, so that would be mine.
Excellent. That was a great question. Love
Yeah.
it. All right, shall we wrap this up, gentlemen?
Yeah, I think we're over time. Time flies when you're having fun.
It does. See that?
Well,
It goes real quick.
first off, a big thank you, Professor
Yes.
Dungeonmaster, for joining us. I hope you will come on a future show at some point because this has been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Rick. I had a great time.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you could join us. So anyway, folks, if you have enjoyed the show, of course, give us a follow on Twitch. If you're watching later on YouTube, feel free to give us a like, or better yet, subscribe so we can tell you when the next video is coming. And certainly keep the comments coming. We'd love to see them. Our next show is coming at you on Sunday, January 31st at 8 p.m. And we are going to dive back into the Temple of Elemental Evil. This time, you can call this part 2. We're going to go into the evil hamlet of Nob, and we're going to go into the upper ruins of the temple, and maybe we'll dive into the very upper levels of the dungeon. And of course, Chris and I will be talking about the development involved also in the original Ventures Reincarnated version, updating this classic for 5th edition. So we'll be going to that as well. So that will be our next show on January 31st.
Great. So at this point, as before we wrap the show up, Professor Dungeonmaster, we do this thing called Pearls of Wisdom, where we basically just give a little takeaway point from the show. So, and then usually we stumble over each other on this. So we'll start with Rick, and then we'll go with myself, and then I'll have you, after you get a little bit of a feel for what this is, then
Sure.
you will have you chip in and do yours, and then we'll actually end it off. So go right ahead, Rick.
All right, sure. So many places I could take this on this show because we've really covered a lot of interesting, territory here. But kind of going back to the whole dungeon terrain thing, I would encourage certainly the DMs out there to kind of, take a note about making your own terrain. Watching some of the videos by Professor Dungeonmaster, and even thinking to my own, projects during the pandemic. Absolutely, if you can afford Dwarven Forge, and it's certainly a fantastic experience when you drop that on the table for your players. So I'm not dissing that, but on the other end of the spectrum, with very little money and kind of a little work, and it's not even that much work, you can really create some very cool things to kind of get your players' imaginations going. And just using styrofoam, using cardboard, using foam core, I've made some things and dropped them on the table. And even now, through Etsy and places like that, there's sort of a cottage industry of people with 3D printers who are cranking out very inexpensive, print pieces that you can paint up. And, like recently, I think Thorne's got a picture of it. Like, I bought a campfire, kind of piece, because I just thought to myself, how many times do you have your characters are attacked when they're, camping around the fire and they're resting, or they stumble into a goblin encampment or what have you. And I decided I've got to have a campfire. And I was able to find a piece for $1.50 via Etsy and paint it up into something that was, really usable. So I would just throw that out there to the DMs and just, watch some videos, find out how to make some of this stuff, because it's fun. And when you drop something on the table that you made, it feels even better.
Great. Excellent one. For my pearl of wisdom is going to be, don't be afraid to make a change in the rules. I think a lot of times, especially some of the modern gamers, they read a rule and they feel that's it. That's the only way initiative has to be. It can't be any other way. Just be open to change, and if something works for your group, go with it. If you're particular, I've said this before, know your target audience. If they want initiative, a group initiative versus individual initiative, if that's going to be something that they're going to get excited about, feel free to do it. Embrace that change, and really, have those conversations with your table of what do you guys want to see? What's the not fun part of the game? Is initiative bogging people down? Is spellcasting bogging people down? Is ranged combat, whatever it is, and then fix it the way that you want it to be, because really it's a shared game for everybody. So that would be my pearl of wisdom. And Professor Dungeonmaster?
My pearl of wisdom is when I get because we all talk about these old modules, and we agree on so many of them, and there are just certain ones that you have to read, and the Hidden Shrine of Timotian is one, and Ravenloft is one, and the Cult Against the Cult of the Reptile God is one. And there are some that are just must reads that they could still be run today, and they're really awesome.
Yeah, I agree. And they're easy to get on print on demand now, or
Yeah.
PDFs.
Yeah.
And that's something that, again, 10 years ago they weren't. You had to go to an auction
Right.
at Gen
You had to
Con or
hunt on
something to
eBay,
get them,
right?
or eBay. Yeah. So I mean, that's which is great too. So well, again, thank you to our very special guest, Professor Dungeonmaster. We hope that everybody enjoyed the show. And with that, we will say good night to everybody, and we'll see everybody in 3 weeks.
Good night, folks.
Good
Bye,
night,
everybody.